So now we've come to the third part of the life of Ruth, and we've called this the flying shoe. And just to recap, remember Naomi with her husband and her two sons have gone out of God's will, disobedient to the Lord. They moved away from Bethlehem at a time of famine, and it came to Moab. And within a short time, her husband and both her children, her sons who were married, had died. Naomi naturally is grieving, and she says, after 10 years, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. And one of her daughters-in-law, Orpha, stays with her people, and Ruth decides to follow her because of her God. And she had made a decision. Because of God, she wanted to be with God's people. And she made that choice, and she comes back, even though Naomi insisted she needs to stay. She said, no, your God is my God. And she made the choice to go back to be with Naomi. And whenever they come back, they noticed everywhere there's lots of food, lots of crop. The famine had gone, and everyone was happy, everyone was healthy. And Boaz, the farmer, when he came into the field, he would say, God bless you. And everyone in turn would say, and the Lord bless you as well. And here was Naomi. And everyone said, Naomi, you've changed. What happened? And she explained how her husband died, her two sons died. And she said, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter. And as a result, Ruth was now with her. And she goes into the field of a man called Boaz. And God is organizing all this together. It's a perfect plan. It's a perfect thing. And there she's working. And whenever Naomi sent her out that morning, the Bible says she went and came. That might sound like a strange thing. She went and came. But she went to the field and she came to the field. Many people have a plan. I want to do something for God. And they get all these plans together and they plan to go, but they never go through with God. When God puts something in your heart, you make sure you do what God tells you to do. And here was Naomi, who was sitting at home and praying that God will provide. And now Ruth comes to a field where all the poor people, that was a law, that God made a law that nobody would be forgotten about. And that's the way it should be. There should not be poor people in the world. The rich should help look after the poor. And here the poor people were provided for. The workers were told to deliberately leave some sheaf, some leftovers, about 10%, so the poor people would have enough to feed themselves as well. And as they went, Boaz began to speak to Ruth. And as he inquired about her, he said, I've heard about you and how you've been good to your mother-in-law, and sorry to hear about your husband and father-in-law. And he said, Ruth, you stay in this field and I will protect you. I'll make sure nobody touches you, harms you, steals your food. You stay here and I'll look after you. And Ruth was touched that the owner of the field would take time to speak with her. And little did she know that God was preparing this man for her. And she went back home and told Naomi. And Naomi said, Boaz, is that the man in the field? You'll not believe it, but he's a kinsman. He can marry you, Ruth, because you're entitled to be married. He's a far-out relative of mine, and he has a responsibility to care for us. And you know what she said to Ruth? Ruth, you need to go and find Boaz and tell him your circumstance and tell him to marry you. Strange, but that's what happened. And that night, she went off into the night, and because all the crops were gathered outside, the workers would have to guard them so thieves wouldn't come and steal them. And there was Boaz busy sleeping under his blanket. And Ruth goes over outside and sits at his feet. And Boaz looked up and said, who are you? What are you doing here? And Ruth said, it's me, it's Ruth. Remember the worker in the field? Well, I've come to tell you that you're my kinsman, the closest person to me, and you can redeem me. You can be my kinsman redeemer. You can marry me. I can be your wife. You don't have a wife. I don't have a husband. We can get married. Now, Boaz liked Ruth. She was a bit forward, to be honest. But Naomi knew that this was she must have known this was going to happen. He said, but Ruth, there's someone closer to you than me, and they're entitled to marry you before I am. And we need to go outside tomorrow morning. I'm going to call the elders to be witness. And they came the daylight the next day, and this other man, who was a closer relative of Naomi, he came before the people and all the witnesses, and he said, you are entitled to marry Ruth, to take care of her because of Naomi. He says, do you want this woman to marry her? And he says, no. And he says, as a result, he took off his shoe, his sandal, before all the people, and he says, he threw the shoe, just like that. And that was a sign before all the people that this man could not go back on his word. He said, I'm clear of wanting Ruth to be my wife. Boaz said, I now can marry you, Ruth. Then the wedding happened. Do you want to hear what happened after they got married? That's the final story. Thank you.